Hello everybody, this is Anthony here, and I'm here to teach y'all lifts and what it is and what it does for us. Very core elements of lift today. We're going to be going over nothing too crazy because we don't really need to go anything crazy. This is a video catered towards pilot training, not engineering. So if you're here for an engineering lift explanation, you're at the wrong place. This is mostly for pilots and flight instructors and anybody who's learning to fly and is interested in the core elementary processes of lifts. Alright, so let's get started. Lift is a topic that people tend to overcomplicate, right? So a lot of people I've seen in the aviation world, I've seen other flight instructors do this where they like to overcomplicate lift and try to make it seem like it's way too intense, right? We're not there to do that, right? You're a flight instructor. We're flight instructors. We're here to simplify things for the student's ease, right? We don't need to make things sound scary. Lift is a cool topic. It can be complicated, but for the most part, it's a couple elementary items, and that's pretty much all lift. And then again, many theories are wrong about lift, right? So I've seen a lot of people teach wrong theories in lift, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, right, to teach a wrong theory of lift to a pilot because they're not making airplanes, so it's not the end of the world, right? But we need to teach them the right stuff, right? And a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, I was taught this or I was taught that, Anthony. Well, I get that you were taught that, but today I'm trying to teach you the right ways, and if it's different than what you were taught, it's not your fault. It's the instructor's fault, and it's probably the instructor's fault. It always starts somewhere. And then it always leads back probably to the FAA, because we'll talk about this. The FAA was teaching equal transit theory and wrong theories of lift 50 years ago. And I've seen this too. I've seen some instructors come up to me and they're like, yeah, I'm doing this guy's flight review. He's like 65 years old and he's telling me equal transit theories of what lift is. He must be stupid. He's not stupid. That's just how he was taught back then, and that's how the FAA asked flight instructors to teach it, and they did their job, right? But we're better than that. We've learned from our mistakes, and we can say, hey man, I understand that you were taught this way, but let's talk about the right way of lift. And that goes, there's a couple other wrong theories that the FAA was trying to get us to teach for a while, but we're better. Again, we figured it out. We're going to teach the proper ways. And now the FAA has a pretty decent explanation of lift, because the best part is it's very barbaric and very elementary. Okay, so again, we just need to know the basic concepts, right? We're operators. We're not engineers. We're not designers. We're not designing airfoils and lift generating devices. We need to know, okay, lift is produced because of this, and this is how I could lose lift, and this is what happens if I lose lift, right? We don't need to know anything else. We need to know how to operate lift safely because we're safe pilots. Again, don't overcomplicate it. It's not that difficult. We don't need to get too crazy with it, just the basics. And yes, it is very cool magic. Alright, so beginning. Lift is not just airplanes. It's sailboats use it, submarines use it, cars use it. They all use lift, right? So let's look at them. So we have a sailboat right here, right? So it's going into the wind at a sideways. I'm not a sailor, so I'm probably teaching it wrong, so I'm just going to stop. But it's basically a airfoil right here. There's the leading edge, there's the trailing edge, and it's creating lifts and propelling the sailboat forward. We have a sailboat right here, right? So you see those lift generating surfaces right there? Those are foils because they're using water, not in the air. For a fun fact for y'all. Those are probably, I want to say they're elevators to go up and down, but I could be wrong. I'm just making a guess. But it's cool stuff. And then we have a F1 car, right? So we have a big wing in the front, a big wing in the front. Looks like a symmetrical airfoil in the middle. Interesting. And there's a couple of vortex generators behind this winglet. And an airfoil on these are pretty much the opposite of what we want to do. They want to push the car down so it can stick to the ground and have more force to hold it during high load turns, if you will. Again, despite popular belief, lift is not a forever changing theory. Like I said, the FAA 56 years ago was teaching equal transit theory, right? That was what they thought was the norm, and then they changed it. I think they had it at skipping stone for a little bit, which is a wrong theory. Then they went to like Venturi, I want to say, which is another wrong theory. But yeah, it's not a forever changing theory. Engineers have been designing these airplanes for over 100 years now, and if they kept changing the way lift was made, how would we have all these crazy airplanes? They know how lift works. Lift is not changing. We know the core elements of lift, we know the complex elements of lift, and they can design crazy stuff. Because remember, the SR-71, everyone knows that beautiful airplane, was designed during a time people believed in equal transit theory. And also, fun fact about equal transit theory, it was disproven by Euler in 1752. So we've known it's been wrong for a long time. If you were to ask an aerospace engineer back on those guys what lift is, their answer is probably going to be Navier-Stokes and Euler's equations. Again, those are very complex, but you can solve those equations and it gives you all you need to know about lift. But again, they're crazy people because they like to do that stuff, where pilots, they probably think we're crazy because we like to fly their crazy machines they make. And together we make a happy family. But we don't have a fluid dynamics background, so we don't need to discuss that. So let's talk about the main elements that we're going to discuss today. Bernoulli's principle, Newton's third law, Newton's second law, and flow turning. Alright, so let's get started. And again, here's my cool pictures. So here's Navier-Stokes for those who were curious as what it was. Again, that's disgusting. That's gross, right? We don't care about that. We just want to know the basic elements of it because we just want to operate it safely. So before we get started, here are my sources. NASA's Beaner Guide to Aerodynamics is a approved FAA material, by the way, and it has a lot of great information for those who want to enhance their knowledge on aerodynamics. But I'm going to give you the gist of it pretty much in these slides. And we'll talk about how it's an approved FAA material later, but let's just get through what we're here for. I do have a background in engineering, so I did source some of my textbooks from school. Fundamentals, aerodynamics, fluid mechanics, internal flow. That one's a tough one to read. I got through it. And then See How It Flies is actually a good read for flight instructors and pilots alike. It complicates things, but not complicated enough where you need an engineering background. He goes into detail. He is an FAA Safety Council member, and he's a pretty smart guy. And he also has a lot of humor involved in it, which is fun to read, but take it as you will. Alright, so let's do Bernoulli. So Bernoulli's principle, here's the equation right here. Basically, you have your pressure energy, your kinetic energy, and your potential energy. We really only care about this kinetic part, right? The moving element of the pressure, right? So a lot of people use a Venturi to visualize lift. It's a great visualizer, not lift. It's a great visualizer for Bernoulli's, right? So that Venturi basically says as it's squeezed to that little hole, it increases in speed. And what happens when it increases in speed? It gets low pressure. So a good example again is Venturi tube, but do not visualize a Venturi tube above the wing. That is a common fallacy to explain lift. It is just a good visualization of what this equation in principle does. So bottom line, all you really need to know with Bernoulli's is pressure is down when speed is up. Very basic, right? And we'll come back to this part of the equation because you'll see it later. Wink, wink. All right. So Newton's third law, conservation of energy, right? So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. An imposed force on an object, an equal force exerted back onto the source from that object. So, example, rocket, right? Hot gas is spewed out below the rocket, out to the rocket. That's a force. And the reactionary force is that a upward movement pushes the rocket up, right? That's how rockets go. Pretty simple. We can all visualize that. It's very simple. We're not complex. We're not making it complex. So why do we care about Newton's third law? Flow turning. Fluid accelerated off the trailing edge as a force, and more later. So let's continue. Basically, I push you. I'm sitting on a skateboard. I push you. I'm going to go backwards probably because you're sitting in your chair. Nice. Newton's second law. So Newton's second law, again, here's a picture from NASA's website, the approved source that we can use on a check ride, for example, or when teaching. There must be a force in order to satisfy Newton's third law. What do I mean by that, right? So if we're in a car going 50 miles an hour, we're not accelerating or decelerating. All the forces are in equilibrium. There is no force. It's just a net zero in force. We need to have some sort of force, and that's where the acceleration portion comes in it. So we talk about that on top of the wing later. You'll see how that on top of the wing, the fluid is accelerated off the trailing edge, and that is a force because F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. As you see here, that's just a derivative in calculus, and it's basically the initial velocity minus the the later velocity minus the initial velocity over the later time over the initial time gives you your acceleration. F equals ma. Right. So now we're back at the lift equation. So this is what I mean when Bernoulli is important, and we'll talk about what Bernoulli does, but in teaching lift, right? Pull up the lift equation. What is that right there? That rho v squared over 2? Oh, interesting. Rho v squared over 2, 1/2 rho v squared. Rho is obviously your pressure, your density, excuse me, and velocity squared. So again, when speed goes up, pressure goes down. Basically saying that in lift. And we'll keep going. So let's talk about flow turning. This is your bread and butter in lift generation. So a fluid does not act like a solid. If I were to hold a shield in front of you and you were to throw a rock at me and it hits the bottom of the shield, it's just going to bounce off downward, right? Fluids don't act like that. It's going to want to stick to the surface a little bit and redirect at the end of it, the trailing edge of it. So we have our leading edge here. And it's the fluid is the relative wind is going to hit that leading edge. It's going to go above the curved portion, accelerate, creating a force, and it's going to redirect down off the wing, off the trailing edge, and it's going to create downwash. And that force, now that it's accelerated, F equals ma, creates a force pushing the wing upwards, kind of like at an angle, but generally upwards, right? We can draw the vectors if you really want to, but just know generally it pushes upwards. And again, speed and direction. So changing either the speed or direction, the flow creates a force, and we'll talk about that later. But just know that the theorem in fluid dynamics is called streamline curvature. When a fluid moves around a curved surface, it wants to accelerate, right? It just inherently wants to accelerate. That's just fluid dynamics understanding, and just know that, right? So we have a wing, and the curved portion of the wing wraps the fluid around it, accelerates it, and the fluid wants to stick and push off, giving us a force. And again, you can say, Anthony, what about like when it falls off the wing? It separates, right? That's separation. If you really want to, you can go into separation and turbulent flow and all that stuff, but we just want basic elements. If this video gets traction, I can go really in depth on boundary layers and turbulent flow and laminar flow and separation, but basic elements is what we're doing today. Alright, so now let's talk about the Bernoulli portion of it. So the center of pressure. As that moving fluid, the relative wind in our example, is hitting the wing, when you create that angle of attack, that increased curve right there on my mouse right here is going to create a faster moving air. And remember what we said, faster, speed up, pressure down. Where is it? There it is. So as that fast moving air moves over it, there's going to be more low pressure up here. And then there's going to be normal regular pressure, which is going to be higher pressure than the lower pressure region above the wing. That higher pressure region is going to want to push upwards on the bottom of the wing, giving you more lift. That's why you notice a lot of people will say, oh, it's low pressure, high pressure, which again, that is a portion of lift. But if you're at a lower angle of attack, in this example right here, the pressure differential isn't that steep, right? It's not something really like crazy. It really only comes into an effect when you have a higher angle of attack, etc. And then, so we have all these equations on here. The center pressure equation is just the integrals above each other. So the area under the curve up here over the area under the curve down here gives you your center pressure. Very basic stuff. Alright, so now we know our basic elements of lift. It's Bernoulli's, Newton's law, Newton's second and third, and flow turning. Alright, so fluid, aka air, wants to stick to the surface as it travels by. Fluid is inherently sticky, right? There is no, it's basically a fluid wants to move in its original path, and it'll just move around an object to go back to its original path. The quanta effect is not real. Again, it is a real thing. It is very much a real thing, but if you read about the quanta effect, it's a fluid jet. So that does not adequately explain how the fluid wants to stick to the surface. We can, in another video, I can go into detail on how it wants to stick to the surface, but just know that there is no jet moving the relative wind above the airfoil. It's just moving through the air. So it doesn't create that quanta effect that a lot of people like to teach. So the fluid just wants to inherently stick to the surface, and yes, there is separation. I'm aware of that, but for basic teaching, that's it. It wants to do that. Streamline curvature tells us the fluid will accelerate along the rounded path. Like I stated before, the more rounded it is, the more it can accelerate, and the more speed you'll get. Acceleration gives us a force, and that force pushes down, downwash, off the trailing edge, Newton's third law. Faster air gives us low pressure, Bernoulli's, like I said. And then high pressure wants to go low pressure. And that's the elementary understanding of lift. And again, like I said, we're pilots. We're not designing lift generating devices. We are operating them. We just need to know the basic elements of it and how it works. And for those of you who dare to do further reading in all those sources I implemented, there is readings on Cutta condition, boundary layer, streamline curvature, Reynolds numbers, and general fluid dynamics. Like I said, I'll probably make another video about those because I do like it, but that's basically elements. Alright, so let's back out of this. So now let's talk about why the FAA, or why the NASA thing is an important source for you, right? This NASA's being guided aerodynamics. So let's say, for example, you're on a check ride, or your CFI is teaching you equal transit theory, or you're on a check ride, and you explain, well, actually, lift is not equal transit theory; it's flow turning Bernoulli's, and your examiner goes, no, it's equal transit theory, and you say it's not, and he says, prove it to me, all right? So how is this a source that we can use? So the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, the PHAK, and Chapter 4, right here, FAA's website, Chapter 4. So now we're in a legal source for the FAA, and I'm looking for equal transit theory. I don't see it. Newton's, I see Newton's. I see Bernoulli's. I see the Venturi as a visual, again, as a visual, not as a true theory of a Venturi on top of the wing. Let's keep scrolling. Cool. I love airfoils. Oh, nice. Oh, look at that. Pretty much equal there. Nice. I'll talk about that. It's cool. Alright, here we go. Chapter summary. For additional, I can't highlight there. For additional information on principles discussed in this chapter, visit the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, Beginner's Guide to Aerodynamics. This link right here. The fact that they put this link in here states that, hey, this is a valid source to use on a check ride or while teaching in a flight instructing scenario. So we'll click on this link. This link, I think, is an old link. Yeah, it's going to send you here, and then you got to go find it, but I found it already. So let's go to the Beginner Guide of Aerodynamics. Okay, so click on this Guide of Aerodynamics. Alright, so let's go look. This is all legal material to use. Alright, so we're at lifts. Oh, wow, it says all this stuff. Oh, here's equal transit. He's probably like, oh, it's lit right there. It's gotta be it. I'll click on it. Huh. There are many theories of how lifts. Unfortunately, many theories are incorrect on websites, and even some textbooks are incorrect. Incorrect airfoil theory. So it basically explains to you why this is an incorrect theory. Oh, hold on. What's going on? It doesn't want to speed up on top to reach the other side. In fact, it doesn't want to. It moves faster. We know that. We just explained that with Bernoulli's. So it's a good source to use, right? All right, so let's go into a little bit more in detail about airfoil, right? So I drew a little chart out. Not my best handwriting, excuse me. So let's look at this wing right here, right? So we have an airfoil right here, and we have the relative wind moving above it, and it's going to increase in speed as it curves around the airfoil and is redirecting a downwash movement. F equals ma, Newton's third law. And what we know, as it accelerates, velocity is greater, therefore pressure is low. We have a low pressure region and a high pressure region below. So you have lift created from the downwash and lift created from high to low pressure. Alright, so again, that is my explanation of lift. I hope you find this helpful in learning about lift and hopefully teaching lift when you become a flight instructor, if you choose to become a flight instructor. And please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.